British Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan visited Australia this week, meeting with British and Australian businesses in the green transport, technology and defence sectors. What has become clear is that Britain is well ahead of Australia in the race to attract skilled migrants to its shores. The Australian's business editor-at-large, Ticky Fullerton, caught up with the Trade Secretary to understand what we can learn from Britain's migration policies.
Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan, welcome to Australia.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've got to ask you, we are days away from finding out who the new British Prime Minister is. You're the other side of the world. Is it therefore business as usual, and will you be Trade Secretary in October?
So we leave it to whichever one of our two excellent candidates wins to determine what their new cabinet looks like. Yes. And I wouldn't dream of presuming what they might choose to do. But in the meantime, it is absolutely, as you say, business as usual. Trade, building our trading relationships, working particularly on my trip here in Australia and with New Zealand friends following the free trade agreements that I signed at the end of the year is critically important to the UK's economy and indeed to that really strong relationship we want to grow. So I'm here meeting with businesses, British and Australian, to hear more about how we can do that.
Well, you've hardly left the airport. You're starting with Qantas.
Well, that seems like a good place to start. A chance to catch up with them and hear about Project Sunrise, which is a wonderful collaboration between Qantas, Airbus and Rolls-Royce. Really exciting project, slightly terrifying when you stop and think about it for someone ordinary like me, but amazing, and to hear about how they're working together, both on the technical issues of doing that, but also looking at those important clean energy issues that sit around aviation. And Rolls-Royce in the UK and Airbus have been leading the way on sustainable aviation fuels, and it's been really interesting to talk to Qantas about how they want to be part of that revolution as well, leading in Australia.
So the tech side also leads you to electric vehicles. You're going to visit Jaguar Land Rover here as well. Britain's a lot further ahead, isn't it, with its transition to electric vehicles in terms of presumably infrastructure rollout. When can you no longer buy a petrol car?
So you're absolutely right. The UK has been world leading in taking on the climate change challenge and moving to clean energy, clean vehicles, and all those challenges we face to make sure that we decarbonise our economy across the board. For the UK, we have set a deadline. We put it into legislation a number of years ago now that you will only be able to buy a net zero emissions vehicle in a car or a van, actually, not lorries. That's another level, it's slightly later, but by 2030. So that's in legislation. And what, of course, has been so interesting, when we did it, it seemed almost like an impossible challenge. I think we gave industry 11 years to do it. But actually, industry has, of course, taken up the challenge, and we are seeing incredible pace now. Government is supporting things like...
But it's because you've got that certainty.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, business will go, and, you know, of course, the consumer initially seemed like an enormously difficult manage, but, you know, apparently, I buy a new car about every 10 years, but apparently the cycle of cars is between 3 and 5 years. So between 2010, 2020 and 2030, in that movement, people are renewing their vehicles, and so it will be relatively easy and indeed eventually compulsory. That's what you'll find when you go to buy a new car, to do that. So that's what we'll buy. And of course, the challenge we have is we give an industry basically 10 years to build up the supply chain to make that possible and indeed viable financially. So we have given some support on the way through, but we are now seeing the numbers of people buying electric vehicles moving at pace as that quantity comes through the system.
Trade Secretary, we've seen the challenge to energy transition in the last 12 months. I mean, I'm looking at the regulators' new costs of energy for British households. They're £3,549, and they're going to go up again. That's 3 times what they were last year. There'll be fuel poverty. You were the, I think you were the champion leading up to COP26 in terms of negotiating on international change and adaptation resilience. How do you see what's happened now and how resilient Britain is?
So the huge challenges, and of course they're not limited to the UK, the disruptions to the supply chains of gas and oil, partly caused by COVID and of course the disruptions there, but the war in Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine has disrupted particularly the gas markets enormously, and as we have made conscious decisions to move away from use of Russian gas as well, the market spikes have been incredibly difficult. It's a commodity, so we are all affected by that gas price hike. Incredibly difficult. In the UK, we have already made enormous support, £37 billion for support for our consumers, which is just starting to come through.
Are there lessons for Australia? 60% of our energy on the East Coast still comes from coal. Should we be moving as fast as we are moving?
So the challenge for any country, and as the COP presidency, when we led the big question to the world last year, and Alok Sharma led that as COP president, was to challenge everybody to think about what their energy mix looks like now and how they set that route to net zero by 2050. Australia was able to come in just in time with a commitment, which was fantastic, and that's the starting point. So the UK is further ahead, without a doubt, both in thinking and indeed in helping our production of energy to become cleaner. 28% of all offshore wind installed across the world is around the UK at the moment.
Trade Secretary, we have a National Jobs and Skills Summit, and one of the questions will be what we do about immigration, skilled immigration, which business is crying out for. In Britain, the number of visas has gone up to 1.1 million. Now that's 70% above pre-Brexit levels. 492,000 study visas, 336,000 working visas. Did you have any pushback from unions or anyone else about opening the doors to skilled visas?
So one of the opportunities that came from Brexit was for us to be able to control our immigration policy once again. And in fact, we have in part copied the Australia with a point-based system in terms of how we are now able, because we are now free to manage our immigration. One of the things we've brought in is a global talent visa as part of the Department of International Trade's remit, where we are keen and welcoming to those who bring specific skills to help us, because the most important thing is to help our economy to grow. We are, of course, working very closely with our schools and colleges to build up where we know for those skills of the future, particularly in areas of clean energy, but in tech and in so many other of those next generational industries, how we can grow the skills from our own young people too. But in the meantime, we want to make sure that our businesses can grow and be as successful as they can be. So we're very keen and welcome those with those skills into the UK through that global talent visa.
And that includes, I think, 8,000 Australians who got a visa as well. But did you see any resistance, any political resistance to skilled immigration at all?
No, the UK has always been a very welcoming country. And I think when people voted for Brexit a few years ago now, the challenge around immigration was that it was not within our gift as a country to determine who we wanted to bring in and how we could manage that. And that is now what we have in place, and businesses and citizens are pleased with it. The important thing, I think, looking forward into the longer term is making sure that our own citizens have all the skills they need. So one of the things I did last year when I was Energy Minister working on COP26 and our domestic energy challenge was a Green Jobs Task Force, where we brought together over a number of months different sectors of our industries, our traditional industries and indeed those looking forwards, working together with government to work out what they needed us to do to set that long-term drumbeat of skills development.
But there was no link between the training that you're talking about now and bringing in skilled immigrants, because that's one proposal at the summit, that they should be linked because of concern about Australians losing jobs.
So I think in the long term, I mean, we have incredibly low unemployment in the UK. And what we need is more of those skills. So there are, I don't have the figures to hand, but there are literally hundreds of thousands of jobs vacancies in a number of high-tech and next-generation. And we want to make sure that we are providing business with the people that they need. We want them to be homegrown. I want to see my kids picking, jobs they want to do. But our economy is going gangbusters, which is fantastic. And what we want to make sure is that they've got the skills they need. So the Global Talent Visa is one that affords them the opportunity to bring people in who will add to our economic growth.
Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan, thank you.